How Yvonne De Carlo used her bedroom to conquer Hollywood, the woman behind Two Masks. In 1956, on the largest movie screen in the world, she stood at the edge of the parting Red Sea and wept. Not as herself, but as Zipporah, the devoted wife of Moses, the most morally pure woman Cecil B. DeMille had ever put on film. The New York Times called her portrayal notably good in a severe role. DeMille himself said he saw in her a depth, an emotional power, a womanly strength that no other actress could bring to the part. Audiences across America watched her and believed every second of it. That same year, a young actor named Tony Curtis was riding in a studio limousine through New York City. He spotted a former classmate, Walter Matthau, standing in the rain outside their old acting school. Curtis rolled down the window, leaned out, and shouted loud enough for half the street to hear, "Walter, it's me, Bernie. I went to Hollywood. They changed my name to Tony Curtis. I made a couple of movies. I slept with Yvonne De Carlo." Then he rolled the window back up and drove away. 2 stories, same woman, same year. Neither one of them a lie. You have probably seen Yvonne De Carlo at least once in your life, even if you never knew her name. She was Lily Munster, the pale, elegant, surprisingly warm-hearted vampire mother on The Munsters, one of the most beloved characters in the history of American television. Maybe you grew up watching her. Maybe your parents did. Maybe all you know is that face, the dark hair, those grey-blue eyes, the kind of beauty that stops a room cold without asking permission. What you were never told is what that face cost her, what she used it for, what the industry that worshipped it eventually did to it. Her real name was Margaret Yvonne Middleton. She was born in Vancouver, Canada, on September the 1st, 1922. The name Middleton died quietly in 1945, replay, said by something that sounded more like a movie star and less like a girl from a cold Canadian city whose father had walked out the door when she was 3 years old. That is where this story actually starts. Not in Hollywood, not in a studio, not on any red carpet. It starts with a man who boarded a ship, promised to send for his wife and daughter, and was never heard from again. What Vancouver teaches you. His name was William Shelton Middleton, a salesman from New Zealand with blue eyes and a talent for disappearing. He left when Peggy, as her family called her, was barely old enough to remember his face. No letters came, no money, just her mother, Marie, and a succession of apartments in Vancouver that sometimes had no furniture and no working stove. Marie waitressed, Peggy danced, not because she was passionate about dance, because dance was the only doors available. By 15, she was performing in clubs, and even then the world was already trying to take something from her. A Vancouver nightclub owner tried to pressure her into exposing herself as part of her act. Her mother pulled her out that night. But Peggy had already learned the fundamental lesson of her world. Men with money expected something in return, and a girl without money had to decide every single morning how much she was willing to give and what she expected to get back. Here is the thing, people who study Hollywood never quite say plainly. The women who survived in that system were not naive. They were not victims stumbling blindly into powerful men's arms. The women who lasted were the ones who understood the transaction clearly, who could look at a room full of hungry eyes and calculate with the precision of a chess player exactly which move to make next. Peggy Middleton understood that before she was old enough to vote. In 1940, mother and daughter made their second trip south to Los Angeles. Peggy was 18. She danced in chorus lines at night and auditioned at studios during the day, collecting small, uncredited roles a background face, a silent extra, a woman who walked through the frame and disappeared. Paramount signed her in 1942 for $60 a week and gave her 20-plus uncredited bit parts before dropping her entirely, like a line item removed from a budget spreadsheet. Universal picked her up next, more bit parts, more waiting. Then came Artie Shaw. Shaw, the band leader who had already been married to Lana Turner, would later marry Ava Gardner and had a documented history of relationships with the most beautiful women in the entertainment business, offered to pay Peggy's wages for a full month so she could leave the nightclub circuit and hire a real talent agent. That agent was Jack Pomeroy. Pomeroy got her first credited film role, a $25 salary, and a Screen Actors Guild card. One relationship, 1 month salary, a career launched. She would go on to tell that story in her memoir with remarkable calm, the way a woman describes taking the correct bus rather than the wrong one. No shame, no apology, a decision made, a result obtained. Peggy Middleton was becoming someone else, and she knew exactly what the transformation required, the rules of the game. By 1945, she had a new name, Yvonne De Carlo, and her first starring role in a Universal feature called Salome, where she danced. The film was not especially good, but the woman in it was impossible to ignore. Producer Walter Wanger, one of the most powerful men in post-war Hollywood, watched it and declared she was the most beautiful girl in the world. Universal placed her under a long-term contract. Hollywood cameramen voted her Queen of Technicolor 3 years running, and somewhere along the way, as the fan mail arrived and the studio limousines appeared and the invitations to the right parties landed on the right doorstep, Yvonne De Carlo made a calculation. She would not hide. She would not pretend. She would use the currency she had been given, that face, that figure, that particular quality of dangerous warmth, and she would spend it strategically. She began with Billy Wilder. This was 1943, before Salome, before any of it. Wilder was separated from his wife, already brilliant, not yet the legend he would become. She called him the first great love of her life, not for his looks, which she described with polite brutality as the physical opposite of everything she had dreamed of, but for his mind, his wit, the way he saw the world. They lived briefly in a small rented apartment they called their love shack. He left her for an actress named Doris Dowling. The first lesson, reinforced sentiment, is a luxury. Move forward. Then came Howard Hughes. Hughes had seen Salome, where she danced 5 times. 5. He flew from Los Angeles to Vancouver specifically to meet the woman on that screen. When she saw him, lanky, underfed, with eyes that seemed to be looking at something just past her shoulder, she felt, she later wrote, something close to pity. This was the most powerful and richest man in the American entertainment industry, and he looked like a man who had not slept in several years. She stayed anyway. In her memoir, she described him as an expert lover, precise, deliberate, careful in a way that felt less like passion and more like engineering. She was put off by his toenails, which had grown so long they curled almost completely around his toes. She noticed everything. She catalogued everything, and Yeshu, the list nobody was supposed to read. In 1987, she published her memoir. The dedication read, "To all the kings, princes, lords, millionaires, and truck drivers I have known." She later told an interviewer she had not wanted the book to be scandalous. She had tried to write about her work, her craft, her films. The publisher had other ideas. What appeared in print was a document that named names with the equanimity of a woman settling an old account, not vindictively, not boastfully, just thoroughly. A record of transactions rendered in her own voice. After Hughes came Robert Stack, who remained devoted to her for the rest of his life. Then, Howard Duff, a Universal contract player she actually became engaged to in April 1947, before his alcoholism ended it. The studio had approved that relationship, by the way. Universal's own matchmakers had quietly encouraged the Duff courtship, the same way they later orchestrated a publicity-friendly romance between her and Burt Lancaster. Lancaster. She described their first encounter as so spontaneous and explosive, she thought she was performing a scene from a romance novel. The night they made love on a mink coat spread across her backyard. One night, one encounter, never repeated, became, in her telling, not a confession, but a footnote. One of many, many such footnotes. She compared notes with Ava Gardner because several of the same men had passed through both their lives. She spent time with Prince Abdul Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran's half-brother, and followed him to New York and eventually to Tehran. She described an affair with Prince Ali Khan, the playboy aristocrat who would later marry Rita Hayworth, in language that was the most alive, the most frankly sensual. She used about anyone in the entire book. There was Sterling Hayden on his schooner. There was Jack Mahoney, Sally Field's future stepfather, with whom she fell genuinely in love, became engaged to, and lost a child with, when a surgical procedure to remove an ovarian cyst ended the pregnancy. When reporters later asked her what made Mahoney famous, she answered without hesitation, "The only fame he has had is what he got by being seen with me." This was not a woman protecting herself with cruelty. This was a woman who had learned, at great personal cost, that sentiment was the first thing that got used against you. And then there was a drive-in restaurant in Santa Monica called Jack's at the Beach. Robert Wagner described it in his 2008 memoir. He pulled his Ford convertible into the parking lot. Yvonne De Carlo was in the car next to him. She looked at him. She nodded. He followed her home. 3 days later, he emerged and drove back to find his car exactly where he had left it. A week after that, he ran into Tony Curtis, who began telling him about a remarkable encounter he had just had at a drive-in restaurant with a woman in the adjacent car who had nodded at him. Curtis eventually published his own version of this story. He described how, earlier in his career, riding a studio limousine through New York, he had spotted Walter Matthau on a rain-soaked sidewalk and leaned out the window to announce to the surrounding street that he had just slept with Yvonne De Carlo,